how did you first get into this world of ancient Greece and classics?
Well, it actually started when I was quite young, when I was 4 years old, in fact. I was taken to an exhibition of objects from Pompeii that was travelling around the world. It happened to be the 1900th anniversary of the eruption of Vesuvius. And so there was a travelling exhibition which came to Melbourne. I was taken along to that, and I have been absolutely fascinated by ancient Greece and Rome ever since then, essentially. There was something about the culture, the objects, the stories that really appealed to me, and I've been following that ever since.
What then is the difference between, being fascinated by the ancient world as a hobby or something of an interest, and then compared to building it into a career?
Yeah, I think I guess the thing is that I've never got bored of it. I guess that's the real key thing, and that no matter how much I've gone into it, there's always more to explore. And this is the thing I find with the ancient world. There's a great deal of it's. I mean, it's a long time period. I should say, you look at Greek and Roman history, you're looking at 1500 years, which is at least even longer if you want to continue it on in some of the before and after sorts of things. And there's a lot happening in that time. There's a lot of different cultures. There's a lot of different literature. There's a lot of different ideas. A lot of different things are happening. And I've just constantly found something that's fascinated me. I haven't always been focused on exactly the same things. Sometimes, I'll take an interest in something earlier or later or a different aspect of the culture. But there's always something there that I always keep coming back to. And it's just something that's stayed with me.
No, very cool. And I'm sure, there's probably, we've only really scratched the surface into learning a lot about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I certainly don't know everything about the ancient world, and I never will, and that's okay. But I've always found enough to keep me occupied.
Now, before we jump into talking about the recent film adaptation of the Odyssey, would you be able to, I guess, describe or explain for someone who doesn't know the poem well at all, like what is the Odyssey?
Sure. So the Odyssey is an ancient Greek poem. It's one of the most ancient poems that we have from ancient Greece, it's an epic poem, so it's quite lengthy, and it describes the journey of the mythological character Odysseus. Odysseus has been involved in the Trojan War, which is this large mythological war that takes place between people from all around Greece and the city of Troy, which is in what is today northwest Turkey. And this war goes for about 10 years, and at the end of it, the Greeks are successful, and then they head home. And a number of them have various adventures on the way home. It's not a straightforward process. They end up getting blown off course. They end up having to spend time in other places and so on. And it takes them a long time to get home. And the Odyssey is a story about one of those characters, Odysseus. And it's a story about his journey home. But it's also about a story about the disruptions that have happened at home while he's away. So he comes from the Greek island of Ithaca. He's the king of Ithaca, in fact, and he's been away for 10 years fighting the Trojan War. And then in the end, it takes him another 10 years to get back to his home. So there's a total of 20 years where he is away from home, and things start to there's a lot of disruption that happens during that period. Things start to go wrong. A whole lot of people have assumed that he's dead, and they have taken over his home. They're trying to become the king in his place. His family is trying to resist that, but it's becoming an increasingly difficult task for them to do. And so what we have in the Odyssey is basically the story of his homecoming, but we get a lot of flashbacks so that we get quite a bit of detail about that whole 10-year journey that he's been on as well. And we get a good understanding not only of his experience, but also of the disruptions that have happened at his home and to the people around him, to his family and to his kingdom.
Now, what do you think it is about the story that means that it has survived across millennia?
I think there's a number of things that make this really give it sort of that strength and that ongoing ability to speak to people. One is the complexity. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different stories within the story of the Odyssey. So there are different things that you can take out of it, different ways that you can understand it, and things that you can appreciate. I think also it deals with a lot of really themes that are part of everybody's life in a lot of ways. So you have this idea of families and being separated from families and the disruption that can come from being separated from families. You have the idea of having to overcome obstacles and deal with various challenges. And Odysseus is an interesting character in the way that he deals with things. He often tries to deal with things by thinking about them and coming up with clever plans rather than being just a brute that goes around and just whacks everything with a club or a sword or whatever. So, I think that's, again, something people can relate to. We all have, tricky situations that we have to think our ways out of. That's something that can speak to people as well. So I think there's a lot going on there that can speak to us in various different ways. I think one of the things that's really interesting is in recent times there have been a number of books that have been written from different characters' perspectives, including some of the female characters. Madeline Miller did Circe, Margaret Atwood did one on Penelope. And so even though a lot of those secondary types of characters are still portrayed with enough interest to develop out further story and further thinking as well. So as I said, there's a lot of depth happening within this story that people can draw on.
Yeah, a lot of people I've heard speak about more recent, stories and tales and journeys and everything seem to draw on pretty much similar themes of what originally seemed to take place throughout the Odyssey. Do you think that truly is the first of that type of tale, or is it just the first that we still know about?
No, we have older. I mean, we even have like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a couple of thousand years older than the Odyssey, or maybe not quite, but at least 1,000 years older than the Odyssey. And Gilgamesh goes on a great journey to do things in his story as well. So I think that's always been part of the human condition, and I think that's probably another one of the factors that mean that the Odyssey still speaks to us today, is that we all end up having to go on some kind of journey, either literally or metaphorically, in order to achieve certain things in life. But in a lot of ways, the Odyssey has become that archetypal journey for a lot of Western literature and thinking, and because it's always been there. It's not a story that's been forgotten. It's a story that's always been part of our culture for almost 3,000 years. And so... And it has all of the things that you expect. It has the sad moments, it has the funny moments, it has the weird moments. You encounter the things you don't expect, and you have all of the adventures that you would expect to have on a journey.
I guess you talk about the different layers that are shown throughout the story, but I guess the central is Odysseus as the man. He, I guess, isn't the standard hero template. What makes him particularly, I guess, depending on what side of the fence you're on, interesting or damaged, or a mixture of a few things?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that make him different. I think the first is that he is sort of renowned for his cunning. That's his big. He's not the strongest of the Greeks. He's not the best fighter, but he's the most cunning of them. So he's always trying to solve problems by coming up with clever solutions, coming up with plans and all those sorts of things. So that makes him particularly different there. And I think one of the other things that is really interesting with him, and again, one of the things that helps a modern audience with Odysseus, is that he's very attached to his family. That's very important to him, his wife and his son. And in particular, you see in the Odyssey with his wife that there's a real connection. There's similar sorts of people there. She's also very clever and coming up with all kinds of plans and that sort of thing. So there's and you know, when they get back together, they spend the whole night talking, and there's a real sort of connection, or there's a love connection there. It's not just an instrumental kind of, well, I need someone to have my children sort of connection. It's, you know, there's genuine affection there between the two of them, which I think is really interesting, and you don't see that in all of the Greek characters as well. Sometimes it's there are a lot more lone individuals who are looking after themselves and very focused on themselves, and Odysseus has that more family orientation, which makes him a bit different as well.
Okay, how do you think ancient Greeks would have viewed him in that time?
So he's an interesting character, and that's one of the things when you have a look at other depictions of Odysseus outside of Homer. They can vary a little bit, and sometimes he's very much praised for being this clever, cunning person, and sometimes he's seen as being a little bit shifty and someone who's kind of tricking people into doing things that they might not be comfortable with. So there's kind of a mixed character to him there. That's one of the things that you see in a lot of Greek literature, but you know, especially in Homer. The characters are not simply good or bad. There's a depth to all of them. Odysseus has good sides and he has bad sides. He does things that are noble and worthwhile, and he also does things that are stupid and petty and inappropriate. And all of the heroes are kind of like that. Even the you know, the characters that the monsters that he has to defeat and so on, they also have good and bad sides as well. They're not simply black and white characters. So I think that provides a sort of a wealth of things to discuss in these characters. It did for the ancient Greeks, it does for us today as well, because you have that kind of ambiguity in a sense about, is he a good guy or is he not a good guy? You can argue either side of that.
Yeah, okay. That I've seen some writing that it's popped up when you've discussed some things, but I've also seen other people. But yeah, that moral ambiguity seems to be a common thread. And even, I guess, from right at the top, like a lot of the gods in ancient Greece were sort of in that similar vein where got up to all sorts of things.
Yeah, they're all morally ambiguous, and most of them are actually pretty much on the bad side, really, if you look at it. Even ancient Greeks had issues with this, and you know, we have discussions from them. It's like, well, you couldn't really use the gods as a moral guide for how to behave. They're off, you know, having affairs and committing incest and eating their own children and things like that, which, you know, is generally not acceptable behaviour then, or as much as it is now. You don't. You do get that ambiguity, and it's all through Greek literature. And it's one of the real things that makes it stand out, I think. To me, makes it also very interesting, because you don't walk away from a lot of these stories with a simple sort of comfort of saying, oh yeah, that was a clear situation and this person did the right thing. You often have situations that are morally unclear, where you're not sure what the right thing to do is, and characters that have both good and bad tendencies that might sometimes do the right thing and sometimes do the wrong thing. So, you know, there's lots to think about when you walk away from it. Like, was that the right thing? Was it not the right thing? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does make it a lot more interesting, though. So I guess, that leads us to, what did you think of Chris Nolan's film?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, I enjoyed it. That's the first thing I should say. Like, I think it was really interesting. It was quite visually absolutely spectacular. I thought he did a really interesting job of translating a lot of the structure of the Odyssey into the film, which is often people, when they try to do a version of the Odyssey, they like to focus very much on the travels of Odysseus and less on the home of Odysseus and the disruptions that are caused by home and the difficulty for him in sort of reintegrating into home. Nolan's Odyssey very much focuses on those things as well. And I think that's a positive. It gives us a reason to care whether or not Odysseus makes it home. So I really like that aspect of it. It's certainly a different take to Homer's version of the Odyssey. I mean, it's the same story, but Nolan's chosen to emphasize some things and de-emphasize other things. One of the things I do think he's done is he's reduced some of the ambiguities around the character. He seems to have removed some of the negative aspects of Odysseus and removed some of the positive aspects of some of the people and monsters that he meets along the way.
Could you give an example of that?
Yeah, well, like the Cyclops is probably the best example I could think of with that. So in Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus has really done the wrong thing by the Cyclops. So he and his men go into the Cyclops cave uninvited, start helping themselves to his food. Then the Cyclops comes home and discovers them and starts eating them. So, like, everybody's doing the wrong thing here, don't get me wrong. It wasn't that it was justified for the Cyclops to start killing the men and eating them, but also Odysseus had done the wrong thing by invading his home and helping himself, to the contents. And also, at the end of the encounter with the Cyclops, the Cyclops doesn't know Odysseus's name. But Odysseus decides, just as they're about to get away, that he's going to say, I'm Odysseus. This is Odysseus that has blinded you. Don't forget that. And what that means is that then the Cyclops is able to bring down a curse on Odysseus. So because the Cyclops is the son of the god Poseidon, he's able to pray to his father and say, hey, this guy Odysseus, he has blinded me. So will you please make it that Odysseus doesn't get home for a very long time and that all his men die along the way and that he appears in a wretched state. And that's exactly what happens. So that opens up the question, why does every single one of Odysseus's men die on the journey home? Well, because of Odysseus. Because he had to boast in that last minute to get a bit of glory, that to tell the Cyclops who it was that had in fact blinded him. And so, yeah, it's totally his fault. There's some other arguments that the men also do some pretty stupid things at times, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of fault going on Odysseus, and that's something that Nolan just kind of completely removed, which makes, and I can understand, there's the temptation that makes Odysseus then that much more tragic figure in the sense of he is being beset with all of these terrible things through no fault of his own, but it takes away that complex tragic figure of being the person who made one bad decision and has had all of these terrible things happen to him as a result. So it's a different take, and that's fine. People can have different takes on a story. I think it's a good thing to have different takes on a story, but it's definitely it makes it a very different kind of experience, and it makes Odysseus a very different kind of tragic hero in that sense.
Yep. Did were you able to just sit there and take it all in, or did you feel those judgments sort of coming up as you were watching the movie?
Yeah, I got to say, yeah, there was a bit of me saying, well, okay, this is. I wouldn't say judgments, because I don't have a problem with someone having their own version of that. I think it's good. It's healthy to tell stories in your own way, and to tell stories in a way that resonates for a different audience, a more contemporary audience. But I did find myself going, okay, well, now this is what Homer's version does, and he's done this differently instead. So let me think, why has he done that? Where's he trying to go with that? And there's a lot of that sort of thinking happening in the background that possibly distracted from me being able to just sit and enjoy the movie.
Were you surprised how little the gods made an appearance?
Yeah, that was a very big difference as well. I wasn't surprised in the sense that I think a lot of people, when they're trying to do modern versions of ancient Greek myths, will remove the gods almost entirely, because I think it becomes it's very weird for us. I think in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, the gods, they're walking around and talking with Odysseus, and they're providing him with advice, and they're fighting alongside him at times, and they're breathing inspiration into him and all kinds of things like that. Like, they are very actively involved, very much like human characters would be involved in a lot of ways, other than they're doing it in a much more supernatural way. But just in terms of actually being present and doing that, they're not just ideas, they're not just figments of imagination or thoughts. They're actually, as I say, they're literally taking part in the action. And I think that would be weird for a modern audience. I think we're not used to seeing that. So I can 100% understand why Nolan decided to remove them in that way. But it then makes it a very different story. That's one of the things that makes Odysseus heroic in the ancient Greek version, is that he has this really good relationship with the gods, particularly with Athena, and she is constantly helping him. At the same time, he has this really bad relationship with Poseidon, having blinded his son, and Poseidon is always hindering him. So you kind of have this constant interaction between the gods as really part of the story, and that's part of what makes him that special character, is that the gods have a personal interest in him in a way that they wouldn't have had for the average everyday ancient Greek.
Right. What parts or sections does Athena sort of show herself or provide a lot of input in the story?
Yeah, she pops in all over the place, but particularly with the homecoming. And in fact, so Odysseus is stranded on Calypso's island at towards the end of his journey, and it's Athena that says, well, actually, enough, it's time for him to be able to go home. And she goes to Zeus, the king of the gods, and says, well, you need to... Odysseus has done his time, he's done his penance essentially, and it's he should be allowed to go home now. So she actually enables him to get home in that sense. But as I say, she's also then provides, she helps Telemachus, Odysseus' son, on his journey when he's going down to Sparta and Pylos. She helps Odysseus when he gets back to Ithaca, and so she's just she's always there in a sense, except when he's doing something really stupid.
Okay. And then another big deviation I've heard is to do with the ending of the movie compared to the story.
Yeah, so the ending, and again, I think that a lot of this comes in with the same sort of idea to make Odysseus a morally less ambiguous sort of character. So in Homer's version, Odysseus is very much set on revenge. Revenge is what it's all about. He kills all of the suitors who were there to try to take Penelope and to take over his kingdom. He kills the slave girls that slept with those suitors as well. And then he's about to engage in a war with the relatives of the suitors. So after he's killed all of these people, that's obviously caused a lot of disruption. And the families of those people are come for their revenge. And we see a lot of Greek stories like this where you have somebody does one thing which leads to somebody getting revenge, which leads to more people getting revenge, and you get this kind of never-ending cycle. And it looks like that's what's about to happen. But again, it's Athena intervenes at this point and comes down and gets everyone to make peace. And that's the ending. Whereas, apologies for the spoilers, but with Christopher Nolan's version, you get Odysseus sort of stopping halfway through the slaughter of the suitors. He makes a big point in that movie about having to take on all of that sort of responsibility for killing the suitors onto himself. He won't let his son participate, whereas his son does participate in the original. And then he decides he has to exile himself to make up for it. So it's a very different kind of... I think there's less moral ambiguity in Homer about the ending. I think Homer's ending is quite happy that the suitors are the bad guys, and there's something correct about them all getting their comeuppance when Odysseus gets back.
Yeah.
And whereas Nolan is clearly uncomfortable with the idea of Odysseus coming back and killing 108 people with the suitors, and then another, I think, 10 or so with the slaves that had collaborated with them, and there's another one that he mutilates and sends on his way as well. I think Homer's comfortable with that and Nolan's not, and I think that's probably reflecting a difference in our times that I think most people today would be uncomfortable with that too. So I understand his desire to change the ending in that point.
Yeah. I'm literally only thinking about it now, but it's funny saying like he literally just sails off into the sunset in the movie. So
yeah.
Which, yeah, again, I agree. It's probably more of a sign of the times where we're not used to that level of revenge and violence and everything. Was Homer an actual person, or do we know really anything about him? And why should we doubt maybe that he was a person?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is we don't know. The long answer is probably not, because, well, at least not in the sense that we might think of him today. What we have with the poems is a very long history. They seem to have originated in the Greek Bronze Age, which is a period between about 1600 and 1200 BC. That's a period where Greece was prospering. They had a lot of international trade. They had big palaces, a lot of wealth, all those sorts of things. And that goes really well until the 12th century, when it sort of catastrophically falls apart. What happens then is that the Greek population reduces, we think, by about 50%, something in that kind of vicinity. The palaces are abandoned, the economic system collapses, society goes into a really rough period. The Bronze Age civilization, the Greeks had been literate, they had writing, but that is forgotten when all of this collapse happens in the 12th century BC. But what seems to happen is that there's a lot of cultural continuity in various ways, and one of those is that stories are told from one generation to the other. And what we think is that the Odyssey, at least parts of the Odyssey, originated back in that Bronze Age period, and then after the collapse of the Bronze Age civilization, these stories were passed on orally from one generation to the next. They became, you had these travelling what are called rhapsodes, these people who would recite these poems at feasts or events as entertainment. They would tell these stories, and they knew it all orally. They didn't necessarily know it all off by heart. They would sort of improvise a little bit here and there. And what happens essentially is that you then have about 400 years where these poems are passed on orally from one generation to the next. And then they seem to have come together into their current, or something similar to their current form, the Odyssey, about 700 BC. So there's about 400 years where this tradition exists only orally. And so it comes together in its current form, and then it's still being played around with for a few hundred years after that before we get sort of a very definitive version that we have today. But we think mostly it had come together by about 700. And what's interesting is that you can look at various details that are described in the poem, and there are some things that are definitely from the Bronze Age, things that existed in the Bronze Age that didn't exist afterwards. And then there are also things that didn't exist in the Bronze Age that have been added in later. So you have this kind of really weird mixture of all these different periods of that kind of 400 years period, all sort of squished together into creating this story with all of these details. So those things tell us that clearly it wasn't just composed at one time, that it was composed over a long period of time by many different people having a lot of different input. There's lots of different stories within the Odyssey that, have kind of been stitched together in various ways to create the current version. So in that sense, it's not the work of any one individual. It is the work of many individuals over many centuries. The question is there one individual who put it all together into its particular form, who kind of worked as some sort of editor, essentially, that created this version? And that's where there's academic debate, and different people have different views on that. It's certainly a very cohesive work that suggests that there's been some kind of input, but whether that was how that happened, when that happened, none of these things are entirely clear to us. So if there were a Homer, that's probably the person that you would make the Homer, this kind of editor person. But if there was, we have no idea who he was, when he was, assuming or even that it was a he for that matter. The ancients had a tradition that was all composed by Homer, but even then they had didn't really have a clear version of who this person was. There's a whole lot of different stories that he came from a whole lot of different places and had all these different lives. So they were clearly just making stuff up, essentially. Although there's kind of a firm tradition that he came from this Eastern Aegean Sea, which is Greek islands or west coast of Turkey, that kind of area. And there's some the dialect that the poems are written in reflect that area as well. But anything more than that, I think, is pretty much wild speculation.
Yeah. Okay. So do we know roughly when that, like, the term Homer started being attributed to it, or is that part of that oral period?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you exactly when it started, but that's very early on, is that they came to be associated with this character of Homer.
Yep.
But yeah, exactly who this Homer was never clear to the Greeks, let alone to us.
Okay. And then in terms of the content of, I guess, the Odyssey, but also the Iliad, historically, what do we sort of think is, there's some parts that are based on historical events, or is it all just fiction?
So, there may be some little bit of truth in there somewhere. We know that the area of Troy was part of this Bronze Age world that the Greeks were part of. We know there was a lot of conflict happening in that time. We know archaeologically that Troy has very large defensive walls, so do a lot of the ancient Greek cities from that period as well. So there's even some textual reference to fighting that involves Greeks and the people from the Troy area, probably. Was there a Trojan War? Maybe. Did it consist of 1,000 ships sailing from all of Greece to lay siege to a city for 10 years? I'm going to comfortably say no on that. Maybe what happened is that 5 ships sailed over and spent 10 weeks besieging a city, and then over time the story got retold over and over again till it became bigger and bigger and bigger till we get to our current kind of situation. Yep. If there is some truth in it, that's the kind of truth that there's going to be in it. Maybe there were multiple battles between Greeks and people on the western coast of Turkey, and they all kind of got merged together into some kind of memory. These things are all possible. So I think it's plausible that there's some historic basis, but I think if there is any, it's going to be relatively small.
Yeah. And what about the Trojan horse then?
Yeah, well, all I can say is that there's no evidence for the Trojan horse outside of literature. But certainly Troy did have very big walls. So, if they were besieging it, they would have had to come up with a way to get inside those walls. But, yeah. I think that's about the most we can say there.
Yeah, yeah. Now, in terms of the, I guess, the problem with translation and how, I guess, it's impossible to fully grasp how it was originally intended when we're speaking different languages completely. But do you think there are parts that the translations capture really well, and then other parts that just really sort of just are completely different?
Yeah, I mean, translation is really difficult, particularly when you're dealing with something like this, where ancient Greek is quite different to English in a lot of ways, which makes it's you certainly can't do a one-to-one translation for anything. Any translator is going to have to make a whole lot of interpretation along the way about what they think the best way that they think to read a particular passage. So it's always, translation is always a creative act. It's not just a mechanical type of act. And I think when it comes to something like the Odyssey, there's a lot of different translations out there, and they all try to do some slightly different things. I think there's a few different variables you can play with. I think the first one is, do you want to translate it into poetry or not? That's a big question. So the original is a poem. It has, so the way with Greek poetry, it doesn't rhyme, but it has a meter to it. So there's a rhythm to every line that continues out throughout the entire poem. So do you want to try to capture some element of that when you do a translation? If you do, that's going to make it harder for you to translate literally, because you're going to have to try to fit, you're going to have words that fit into some kind of poetic structure that you have as well. So that becomes, that's another challenge that you have to deal with. Some translators completely abandon the poetic format and say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell the story as it is. And when you do that, you can be a little bit more literal in the translation, but you can also make it then a lot more readable. I think you can kind of then read it like a novel, essentially, and that becomes, it's a bit more straightforward but a bit less poetic. So you're gaining a clearer understanding of the story but less understanding of the original medium. So you kind of lose that aspect of it being something that is designed to be, because in the ancient one was not designed to be read, it was designed to be recited and listened to. And so you kind of miss some of that aspect of it as well. So yeah, it's a real dilemma, I think, for any translator, doing that. And again, sometimes some translators like to use very obscure words and archaic language when they do a translation. That can make it seem very foreign and very hard for a modern reader to get into, and can put people off. Whereas a contemporary one can also then seem very banal in a sense. There's all these different dilemmas that you have to go into when doing a translation of a work like this, which makes it very difficult. But yeah, I always say to people, if they say, well, what's a good translation? I say, well, it depends on what you want. Do you want something that you can read through and quickly understand what's going on, or do you want something where there's artistry to appreciate, all these sorts of things? And yeah, depending on what you want out of the experience, a different translation is going to be right for you.
And yeah, it probably depends which angle you're coming from beforehand. So when I was researching a bit more about the Odyssey, I've seen that Emily Wilson's translation seems like it's one of the most popular now, and the opens up describing Odysseus as a complicated man, where other versions might use terms like a man of twists and turns, or skilled in all ways of contending, or similar to that. Is that just falls onto the person doing the translating and what flavour they're going for? Yeah,
very much. This is what I say. A complicated man, nice and easy. You can read that and take it in. A man skilled in many ways of twists and turns or whatever. It's something like that becomes a lot more. You have to do a lot more thinking just to get through the first line. So it's a style thing. I really like Emily Wilson's translation from the point of view. I think she's done a really good job of trying to make the most of all of those different aspects. She has put it into a sort of poetic meter, but at the same time, she's also done a very close translation, and she's tried to do it in language that's very contemporary as well, which I think makes it very readable. And to me, I think that's really important. But yeah, other people prefer different approaches. But yeah, those are all the kinds of decisions that you have to make when you're doing a translation.
Have you got any specific, examples from the story where, different translations sort of render a patch or a little line sort of completely different depending on which side of the fence they land on?
Not off the top of my head. No, but there are some things around. If people are interested in that, it's you can Google that and find some interesting things from that. Emily Wilson actually did quite a bit while she was in translating, because this was quite a while ago, back in the days of Twitter before it became what it is now. But she was actually sort of tweeting a lot of her process along the way, looking at, here's some different translations, and this is kind of what I'm thinking of doing, which was quite an interesting thing to read as well.
So then, I guess, broadening a little bit to not just the story and that period of time, but ancient Greece specifically, what do you think are some of the things that modern day times we sort of get wrong about how we view the civilization?
Yeah, ancient Greek civilization is really interesting. I remember reading years ago, someone sort of said that the thing about reading ancient Greek literature is that you'll be reading along and something will seem extremely familiar to you, and then you take one step to the left and you're in something completely alien and different. And that's always really stuck with me, and something that I've found is like there's a lot that you can resonate with, that you can relate to from our own modern experience with the ancient Greeks. One of the things I find really fascinating about Greek literature is that they tend to be very introspective. There's a lot of thinking about what motivates people and that sort of thing, and what's going on in their mind. And a lot of it's very relatable. You meet characters that you can recognize and say, hey, yeah, I know a person that's just like that, I know a person that's like this, or I've had a situation that's like this. But then, as I say, you take one step to the left, and suddenly you're confronting a man-eating Cyclops, or dealing with something. You've got the gods coming in and walking around and fighting next to people and things like that, which seems very alien to us and our experience of life. Not just in literature, but also they have these sorts of things happening in their historic accounts as well. That ancient Greeks believed that they'd seen gods on the battlefield helping them out during war and that sort of thing too. So there is that real sort of combination of things that they're just like us and things that they're not at all like us, and I think that's what makes it really interesting to me, looking at a culture so far back in time, but having the information from them to be able to see how they're both like us and not like us, and what things kind of are just part of the all human experience and what things are different. So I think anything which kind of simplifies the Greeks down into, they were foreign and weird, and that's wrong. And anything that says, they're just like us, that's wrong too, and the reality is that there's a little bit of both of those things. So, I think, that would be one thing. And just the complexity and depth of the ancient Greek experience, which we have available to us through different writings as well, I think is, just shows that like not all ancient Greeks were the same any more than all modern people are the same. Sometimes, we have this popular conception of the Greeks were great thinkers, and that they were very rational and not emotional people. And some of them were very rational and some of them were very emotional, and sometimes they did really stupid things and sometimes they did really smart things, and some of them were smart and some of them weren't, and some of them were rash and some of them weren't, and there's a huge variety. So again, I think that it's often I think when we look at people from a long time ago, there's often a tendency to simplify how we understand their society, how we understand them. and their society was no more simple than ours and no more uniform than ours or anything like that. It was messy and different and varied, and that's part of what makes it interesting to me, but it often gets glossed over.
If you could go back to a very particular time or moment from ancient Greece, what would it be?
Yeah, if I I only want to go back if I'm just visiting. I don't want to be moving there permanently.
Yeah.
There's a lot there that I don't think I would be comfortable with. But you know, I feel like the Athens in the late 5th century, there's so many things that we know about ancient Greece is from that time. We have, Socrates, the philosopher, going around pestering people, asking them questions. All of the Greek tragedies we have come from that period as well. The Parthenon is built during that time. I would love to see some of those things for real. So yeah, if you've got a time machine, that's what I'll be doing with it.
Yeah, it's your daydream. You can do it however you want. Now, I've always wondered, did the ancient Greeks just every day going about their business, did they actually sort of physically believe in the gods as much as it's portrayed, like literally that they were a part of everyday life and would come down and interact, or was there a bit of that mythology even then?
Yeah, and a bit somewhere in between the two, I think, would probably be the answer. And again, it depends on who you ask. Some ancient Greeks were atheists. Some were highly religious. Some believed that the gods were constantly giving signs to people and were, appearing in various places to help out. And some believed that the gods just mostly minded their own business. So there was a huge variation between different people, and there was a whole range of different beliefs. But I think one of the things that is very different from our society is that the gods were absolutely everywhere and involved with absolutely or religion was in part of absolutely every aspect of ancient Greek life. Political discussions involved the gods. People would consult oracles about whether to go to war or not, so they'd get the god's opinion on whether a war was a good idea, or not to mention all kinds of everyday decisions that they would make. Even things like the theatre was part of a religious festival. The Olympics in antiquity was part of a religious festival as well. So it had those religious components going on. If you walk down the ancient Greek street, you would see so many things that are decorated with depictions of myth and the gods. We know this from the archaeological record. People's crockery had depictions of myths on it. The temples had the depictions of myths on the outside of them. People had home decorations that were myths. People had jewelry that had myths on them, mirrors that had myths, like all this. So the gods were just everywhere visually in ancient Greece, and shrines to them were all over the place as well, statues of them and all these sorts of things. So I think the images of the gods were a constant presence, so I think there was definitely, certainly for some people, they were a lot more alive and active than what we might be used to.
Do you personally have a favourite Greek god?
Yeah, I mean, all of them, they've all got good and bad aspects of them. I probably shouldn't say that. If you learn nothing else from Greek myth, it's just saying disrespecting the gods gets you're struck by lightning. But I would say Athena's a really interesting character. I think so. She's a goddess of wisdom and craft. She takes on a kind of mothering role for a lot of the heroes, where she kind of guides them and helps them and provides them with advice about what to do. At the same time, she's a very unusual character because she's a woman, but she wears armour and is involved with fighting, which Greek women historically never were. So she's kind of very much of a transgressor of the social norms and boundaries. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on in that character that I find quite interesting.
Yeah, and then having a husband who's just off gallivanting around all the time?
Oh, no, not Athena has no husband, but Zeus is her father. Uh,
Oh, father. Okay, right. I thought they were.
yeah,
Yeah, right. Who am I thinking of then? Who's Zeus's
but
wife?
Hera is the one. Hera is Zeus's wife.
Hera. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
she
Yeah.
has a whole lot of other. Yeah, she has a whole lot of other problems going on, mostly to do with her husband. But yeah.
Have you anything that you've sort of been researching in the last, I guess, few years or recently that has made you change your mind or views on that sort of period of time that comes to your brain as I ask it, or it's probably a bit of a tricky question to dive into?
It is, but one of the things that I have been researching a bit recently is the process of Greek colonisation. So this is actually something that's happening at the same time as the Odyssey seems to be sort of come together. So around that period, around 700 BC, and next 100 or so years afterwards, the Greeks kind of had this huge expansion period where they leave what is their homeland in what is today Greece and sort of Western Turkey, and they start founding cities all around the Mediterranean, like mostly in Sicily and southern Italy, but also as far as France and Spain and across North Africa and around the Black Sea in Ukraine. And I've been doing a bit of research onto that, and it's a much more complex process than I had thought it was. It's very different to the kind of colonization that the Europeans did in the 19th century, where they would just go to some place and say, right, Australia is ours now, and we're just going to live our life and do our own little British thing in Australia, replicate their life. There seems to have been a lot more interaction between locals and the Greeks. The Greeks often were there with permission of the locals rather than kind of invading. They were often establishing trade networks. So you start to see these Greek things being adopted by the local people in the local area as well, and then vice versa. You start to see local things sort of seeping into the Greek cities as well. So that's a really interesting process. It's something that, in fact, some people have read into the Odyssey. We see with Odysseus sometimes when he goes to these different places, that when he goes to some place where they are what he considers to be civilized, then he has he's very respectful and very polite, and he builds these good relationships with these people, and they exchange things and so on. And when he goes to somewhere where he considers to be uncivilized, it ends in conflict and fighting. And some people have seen that as kind of capturing some of this colonization period and that Greek experience where, sometimes you go to another place and you create these good relationships, and sometimes it doesn't end well because the people, they don't want you there. So that process is just, it's helped me, I think, to appreciate some of the other people around the Mediterranean at the time who weren't Greeks, who were also having their own civilizations and cultures and were interacting with the Greeks in various different ways, giving them things, taking things from them, building their relationships in different ways. It's to me, that's been, there's a lot of complexity there that I've come to appreciate.
Yeah, interesting. I guess it's easy to look back and think about areas as just being fairly, that's where the ancient Greeks were, but there's all sorts of different civilizations that intermesh and overlap and everything, which we probably forget about pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, we have the Greeks have the great advantage of that we've got a whole lot of literature from them, whereas a lot of these other people, we have nothing in their own words, and so it's very easy to pass over them. But when you look at the archaeological evidence, you look at the little snippets of comments that we get here and there in Greek and Roman texts, you start to see that actually there's a lot more going on.
Now, before we finish up, Christopher, if I guess someone had watched Nolan's film recently and then were thinking that they wanted to go deeper into this topic and look into ancient Greece and the literature and everything, where would you point them as a starting point?
read Homer's Odyssey. That'd be my starting point. Get yourself a copy. Emily Wilson's is a good one, but you've got to pick the one that's right for you, the one that sort of reads the way that you want to read, and have a read of that, and you start to see some of the differences that you get there. And then there's lots of different resources out there. There's places you can go. In Melbourne, we have Hellenic Museum. It's a great resource. They have a lot of things going on that you can be part of, find out some more. We also have the Greek community, provides a whole series of lectures and so on. And then, there's a million things to read and watch online as well. So, no shortage of things if you're interested. But I reckon, start, if you've enjoyed Nolan's Odyssey, read the original. It is quite readable. It's quite approachable, and you can start to... It stands up in its own right, the original poem. You can start to see some of the contrasts there. It's a good place to start exploring.
Cool. And what else have you got personally coming up work-wise and research and teaching and everything?
Yeah, so I do some work with the Hellenic Museum. So I'll be do a summer school every January with them, which will be coming together soon. We'll be putting together soon, and that's something for the general public to come along and learn a little bit about different aspects of ancient Greek world. I do some tours as well. I've got a tour coming up to Spain coming up in the new year, which not so much looking at Greek things, but looking at some Roman things and some other things as well. So that's certainly something to look forward to. Not sure what else the future has for me at this stage.
No, great. I really appreciate your time, mate. I think obviously this has probably taken a lot of the world's sort of attention lately with the movie coming out, but hopefully it gets a bit of traction and gets people more interested overall in terms of this period of time. But yeah, I'd be keen to pick your brain on some other topics about the ancient world as well down the track. So I really appreciate your time today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.